Thank you so much for being here today. Today I wanted to speak a little bit about ground and groundlessness. And I know Buddhist teachings out there do speak about it in this kind of wisdom knowledge format, but I want to kind of integrate it a little bit with some of the body and what that look like or may feel like. And a great metaphor I love using the format is martial arts, Aikido. It's a Japanese martial art, and the philosophy is based on blending and harmonizing with whoever is working with you. And the person that's working with you, your partner, in the martial world, we call that your attacker. And so the idea is every time you're on the mat, you're always paired with various different attackers. And I find this to be highly beneficial because when we feel and we believe and we think that we're really, really good, kind people, which everyone more or less on the martial art mat is, we actually are really able to discover the underlying maybe knee-jerk reactions that sometimes we don't even realize is there. So when we get maybe attacked by a specific attacker that maybe looks a little bit burly and gruesome, instead of being this very kind, nice person that we thought we were, our muscles get involved into it and we want to shove our shoulders into it and we start touching upon aggression, right? And it's really beautiful to be able to recognize that and see that on the martial arts mat and be able to work through that, in this community that is there obviously to help facilitate your growth. So when I think of ground, first aspect of it is, when you first start on the martial arts mat, you get very adapted to and comfortable with, if you will, if that's the word to use, with rolling and falling. So that means, back rolls or front rolls, and that's to help facilitate when there are throws being executed from a technique, that you feel very comfortable that ground is there and it will be there for you. And once you know how to move the body, it's not meant to harm you, right? And that you get proficient enough with it such that when you utilize the ground to fall, it almost feels like this really nice, nourishing, nurturing place where you can fall to the ground, take a moment, come back with something a little bit more. And it's this interesting process that you can witness for kind of the beginners, when they're first about to fall. We don't have eyes in the back of our heads, so it's really easy to have a tendency to kind of turn our head to kind of try to make sure that the ground is there. And I think that's such the truth and the honesty of when we first maybe start on this path in the practice. We start this sitting practice of meditation. And sometimes we're not sure if, it really will be able to sustain us, or if it is really as beneficial as maybe everyone else touts it to be. And so very similar kind of to the beginner in the martial arts mat, when you're about to be thrown, you still kind of look back like, oh, wait, is the ground there? And, there's a beautiful saying that my sensei shared with us in one of the classes, like, we start working to trust that ground is there. And something that's very tangible in this world is, based on the principles and law of how the universe works, gravity is here and the ground is always there. And so instead of having that response and the potential maybe fear of like the unknown, that if you're moving into some kind of a back fall or a back throw, that you can trust that ground is there. And that trust obviously develops over time when you practice a little bit more, so that when you do fall and you kind of just sit down, squat, and you roll on your back, you're like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. And that's kind of where it starts. You develop this relationship with the ground. I still remember, early days of Aikido, one of my first few classes, it was up in San Francisco, doing graduate school up there. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with San Francisco, but there's different pockets and neighborhoods. And because it's such a small parameter of a city, each city block has a very different energy. And I didn't believe that at all when someone told me that, since I was moving out there from Arizona. So the wide expanse of, the desert compared to this very tiny, 7x7 like city block area that had very different energies with each block. And to get to where I was living at that time, the most direct route was to cross through the Tenderloin. And the Tenderloin isn't the best neighborhood, a little bit gritty, and a lot of, homelessness there, and the vagrants and all the stuff like that, and drug use. But in my head, my logical mind was, well, this is the most direct route, so I'm going to go right through it to get to school, my dojo, and come right back to the house. Which in hindsight, was a great learning experience, and, having some more intelligence, I probably wouldn't do that anymore. But what I found was, when I first did that, the first few trips, it was really, really jarring. Being a female, I was already kind of scared and feeling vulnerable with this huge unknown city. And of course, we don't want to put that on the outside to show other people. So I put up this really tough front that looks like, okay, no one mess with me. I have a very serious face, right? Which only, I truly believe on an energetic level, people feel that. And so they still will come and try and engage, right? So if that's like asking for things, if that's like in your face, just talking gibberish because they're in their mental illness, or if it's like them just outright throwing anger at you for no other reason, for just the fact that they want to throw anger at you. So I found I was starting to dread this walk, right? But again, going back to our minds, we have this very logical thing. It's like, okay, well, it's the straightest line, so I'm just going to go there, which I feel like if we recognize when we progress on the path, we start to learn to tune into our intuition. And so sometimes maybe logically the straight line is the right way to go, but intuitively we feel like, no, we need to make a right turn and then make a left to kind of be a little bit tangential. So after one of my classes in Aikido, where Sensei spoke about ground and this relationship with ground, he had us in the dojo not only working in a technique, but also kind of walking, feeling like we had this relationship with ground where we felt at home with it. And that evening after training, I figured, well, I have nothing else to lose. I might as well put this practice into use, and let's see what it feels like, looks like when I walk home. And honest to God, that was the first time after I had just moved to the city where no one messed with me. And no one messed with me not because it was out of fear. No one messed with me because they didn't feel any kind of, my sense was, any kind of aversion or aggression or stay away from me kind of thing. I was very, peace probably would have been a good word to describe, just kind of with myself and ground and just walking home. And so that really struck a chord with me of how powerful the practice is when we are able to take that out into the world out there. That very simple yet easy concept, right, of having a relationship with ground. And it's interesting to notice sometimes, and not out of judgment, it's just, everyone comes from different walks of life, where there's the frantic people, kind of in their angst, and they're walking, and their relationship to ground doesn't feel connected, right? Feels a little bit like, oh, it's like a little hot potato. I got to really walk really fast to get to whatever I'm doing, to finish whatever it is I need to do. So just something to file away when we start on this path and practice with regards to this relationship to ground. and cultivating this friendship, if you will, with them, because it truly is there to be able to support you wherever you are in this world. So as we move kind of further along the path, we start to recognize, because of our sitting practice, the intention of kind of cultivating stillness and peace, that there's also this process of letting go and releasing, right? There's this change and transformation happening internally, mentally, emotionally, and maybe sometimes even physically. And we recognize in the practice that we use, kind of as they say in the Aikido world, we use technique to get to know technique. So we use ground to get to groundlessness, right? And for our ego and our mind, the thought of groundlessness sounds very scary and not necessarily even something enticing that you want to actually reach for, strive for. And understandable, right? When I hear the word groundlessness, my mind and my ego think, I have nothing to stand on. I have nothing tangible. There's no stability, and maybe there's a sense of loss, right? So in the martial arts practice, again, bringing it back to something that's like tangible to be able to recognize, the best way to describe or the experience that I feel is very similar to that groundlessness experience is high falls. So if you guys don't know what high falls are in martial arts, in Aikido world, it's instead of being thrown and reaching for the ground and doing your roll, front roll, back roll, the fall takes place in air. So the point of reference is, let's say someone has your hand and they have a joint lock on it, and you aren't being released by that joint lock. And in order to alleviate the stress that's being placed on your joint, your body has to do a flip around the joint lock that is being held by the attacker, right? And it's extremely disorienting. Definitely not for some beginner to come and start out with, because they don't have the foundational pieces of having some relationship with ground. So once we have the pieces in the relationship of ground, we start to integrate that into our own system. So ground becomes within us, right? And the point of reference I like to think of is our heart. It's kind of like from the crown of our head down to our center, right? Heart, and then the base of our feet up. Even though I know in martial arts there's a lot of focus on kind of the navel center, the hara area for a point of reference, which is not wrong, but I'm speaking in terms of our meditation practice in living and working the world out there. That groundlessness comes when we become oriented and rooted in our heart center. And from that space and place, we're able to move in the world, no matter how chaotic it is. If we stay rooted in our heart center, it becomes that kind of like sailboat mast, that's buoying up in really turbulent seas, that no matter how chaotic life can be, that the buoyancy of that mast, in the sailboat, is very similar to being able to have that buoyancy when we stay connected and rooted in our heart center. And I imagine kind of, a beautiful concept of kind of being like a star in the sky. That their brilliance and their shininess. You know, when you look at them, the sky looks so miraculous and magical. And they aren't oriented in any specific way to ground per se, and yet in that space of their groundlessness, they are being, right? And they're perfect in their being. And I don't know about you, but when I look up at the stars at night, it's really serene feeling. Right? So I imagine that when we leave it off our meditation cushion and we go out into the world, day to day living of life, work, friends, family, that if we feel like it's starting to feel too chaotic, maybe it's one of those days and everything feels really overwhelming and everything, all the information is just flooding your system, and you just can't feel like you can get your head above water. Something to consider in that moment, if you can recognize that and catch yourself in that moment, is to root yourself into your heart center. And that can look like and sound like, oh my gosh, this is so much. I'm so stressed today. What is going on? I'm dropping my keys 3 times as I'm walking to the car. I close the door on the car and my jacket's stuck through the door. Those kind of days, right? That you recognize that you're like, okay, it's one of those days, right? Maybe close your eyes. If you're able to close your eyes wherever you're at, whether that's sitting in your car right before you start the car, maybe sitting at your desk at the office, and just bring your attention and focus to your heart center. And taking a few breaths from that space and place. Right? Not trying to change or do anything. It's really just bringing the attention to your heart center and breathing there. And from that space, taking a few breaths, maybe opening your eyes and being able to go out about the day and notice if anything changes. Right? There's this beautiful thing within our heart chakra. It's a point of balance. And part of that point of balance, the aspects around that, is love. And love within the aspect also compassion. Within compassion, the acceptance piece, kindness. And there's also a wonderful thing in there as well, that's the sense of humor. I'm sure if you guys can look back in your lives, sometimes when the life gets really dire and seemingly really, really serious, that when there's been humor infused into it, it kind of breaks open the shell of that seriousness, the facade and the drama that is being played out. And the humor helps us to be able to right ourselves in balance, bring us back into center. So some things to consider as we are moving within our relationship and cultivating this relationship of ground and moving towards groundlessness. I find that when we start delving into the world of groundlessness, it becomes kind of that next level of growth. And what I mean by that is we're able to start implementing and integrating all the tools we've learned on the path and the practice in those moments where we feel like we have no ground, in those moments where we feel like we have no space, when we feel like we don't even have a moment to breathe, to take even a breath in, because there's moments like that. And when we can have a point of reference that can ground us in that place of groundlessness, which is in our hearts, we have the ability to be able to sail a little bit smoother on those, turbulent seas. Not only are we able to benefit from that, but we're able to offer that smoother sailing, right, as a guidance to others around us. I think sometimes we think, at least what I thought when I first started on this path and practice was, wow, there's so many unhappy people out there in the world. I guess, if I need to show my support to be unhappy with them, that way it'll help them feel connected and feel better in some way. That will be my way of helping them. And I've come to find out that that's not true. What I have found, it sounds like an oxymoron, is that when I'm rooted in my heart in that place of peace and serenity, and from that place I offer presence, listening ear, shoulder to cry on for whoever or whomever that comes to me that's suffering, they feel better, not because I also have felt just as crappy as they have, but the state of serenity and peace that we come and meet them with helps to elevate them, right? To a space and place where they recognize, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, that, okay, peace is possible, even when they're suffering. And so that's how we become those lamps and light, in the world. Is not through a big propaganda and lots of loud infomercial commercials. It's very subtle. That practice is what we cultivate. Like when we go into a store and we, work with maybe a customer service person or a cashier or a clerk, and we walk away feeling, oh, that was so nice. That felt really nice, right? And I feel like that's the experience, the tangible experience of when we're rooted in our hearts, and they are too, and we have that exchange and that interaction. It can be really beautiful. And obviously there are moments when that doesn't happen that way all the time. And we recognize that. And we recognize when we get taken off balance, to come back into our center, into our hearts, and offer maybe some compassion, right, to the person that cut us off and was trying to get us into some car accident. And we want to, have our righteous anger little staff, pitchforks, like, how could you? What kind of driver are you? And recognize that, oh, okay, wait, maybe they were just in a rush. We don't know their story. And, how many times, if we can be really honest with ourselves in a compassionate way, have I also done that too? Maybe I've, switched lanes and changed, and all of a sudden didn't realize there was another car beside me. There's a beautiful adventure that awaits us when we move from this place of ground to groundlessness, right? And the wonderful thing is when we play in the world of groundlessness and we feel like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I can't orient myself. This is so disorienting. Then we are always able to go back to ground. We can always go back to the beginning. I feel like in our culture today, there's such a push and a conditioning and expectations even maybe around, if you've reached a certain level, that there's no way you should ever go back to the beginning, to ever start over for whatever reason, because that would somehow be, looked upon as failure. And yet in the Eastern culture, there is such a continual going back to the beginning, because they see it as the refinement process. That's the refinement that brings in the purity and the beauty of the art, right? Just like in martial arts, and I think of, in Japan when they do the tea ceremony. I even think of, if you guys are familiar with the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. Great, great movie. I love that. And his own recognition as a Westerner diving into this Eastern culture of Japan and recognizing, oh my gosh, these people wake up from sunup to sundown and they're all about refining their art, whatever that is. You know, if it's picking crops in the fields or if that was archery, right? Pouring tea. And I feel like that gets forgotten in this world today when we are so pressured and pushed, you know, to meet deadlines and schedules and projects and fiscal year end and tax season and all these things. This is the wonderful gift of being able to sit with this practice, this sitting meditation. Because we can come onto our meditation cushion and let all of that go. Just for a moment, you know, just set it at your doorway, in your room, wherever it is you have your meditation cushion. And know that you can pick it right up after you finish your practice. But in that moment when you're sitting on the meditation cushion, you can practice the refinement process of coming back to the beginning. Seeing what else you missed when you first started. You know, I think that was the biggest lesson, and the lesson I'm still kind of unpacking, you know, after receiving my black belt in Aikido, is I feel like I've completely come back to the beginning again. And I'm learning so many things for the first time as if I've never learned Aikido before. And it's such a beautiful and fun process to be able to enjoy and have fun with. Even in the lives we live, I think sometimes we forget to have fun. So ground and groundlessness. So maybe consider working with ground a little bit more in your life, because it's definitely there to be your ally, your friend. Now, when we come to know ground intimately well, we're able to dive into the world of groundlessness, staying rooted and centered in our hearts. So thank you so much for being here today.